Following the Second World War, Second Presbyterian Church, like many other mainline congregations, experienced new growth and participation from among its members. In 1951, in conjunction with the church's 60th anniversary, the congregation raised $250,000 for the erection of a gray stone chapel where the manse once stood, with a dining hall and a fellowship hall beneath. The church also added additional Sunday school rooms east of the chapel, rooms we now call the hospitality and session rooms. Then they also dug out beneath the sanctuary 2 meeting rooms, one for Boy Scouts and the other for Girl Scouts. In 1953, the church began the operation of a weekday kindergarten, what we now know as Second Presbyterian Church Preschool, a program that thrives to this day. In 1955, the Sunday worship schedule expanded to include 2 morning services, and the church supported 2 missionaries, one in Brazil and the other in Congo. In 1958, the church installed all of our stained glass windows in the sanctuary along the 2 walls. In 1941, the rose window had already been in place. Between 1941 and 1965, the membership of Second Presbyterian Church grew from 838 members to 1,400, the church's high. In 1965, the church purchased 4 old houses on the south side of Mountain Avenue. These 4 lots are now what make up our Mountain Avenue parking lot. And in 1966, over $600,000 was raised for a building fund to construct a gray stone and brick addition to the east of the church sanctuary. This created the space we currently use as our fellowship hall, our kitchen, our preschool, church nursery rooms, and children's Sunday school rooms. All of this growth and expansion enabled the church to remain rooted right here in the city. As the congregation grew, our space changed and grew to match the ministries that took shape inside. For Christian education, children's and youth choirs, youth and scouting groups. Being a congregation committed to the world outside its walls, Second was incredibly generous in its involvement and giving. In 1965, the same year the church purchased the lots on Mountain Avenue, the church gave away $97,000 in benevolences. This is almost equal to the church's operating budget for that year. Much was happening in the world during the decades of the 1950s and 60s. In 1954, the Supreme Court rendered unconstitutional the concept of separate but equal schools. It took some time for the effects to trickle down to Roanoke, and local Presbyterians, including members at Second, participated in the debates over busing and the ensuing struggle of civil rights that erupted in the 1960s. Dr. Hayden Hollingsworth was clear. Everyone was welcome at Second Presbyterian Church, regardless of race, creed, or nationality. His directions to the church ushers were to welcome anyone warmly, to hand them a bulletin, and ask them where they would like to sit in our sanctuary, because any seat was open to them. Dr. Holly, as he was affectionately called, was committed to both the preaching and hospitality of the church. He preached on the issue of civil rights and its importance. Roanoke attorney and church member and future governor of Virginia, Linwood Holton, would speak with Dr. Holly on the plight of African Americans in Virginia, and he commended Dr. Holly for his support of civil rights. Linwood Holton would go on to eventually help break the back of resistance to desegregation and civil rights in Virginia. Years later, when Dr. Bill Klein arrived at Second Presbyterian, he was grateful and relieved to serve a church that was largely free of conflict and in support of civil rights. It also struck Dr. Klein that Second opened its doors to the community for other groups and organizations to hold classes, meetings, and events in its buildings. At this stage, the church had evolved into a community church where folks felt welcome. To quote Dr. Bill Klein from our church history book, at a time when churches were abandoning cities and fleeing to the safety of the suburbs where the right people lived, I was very impressed that an influential church would choose to stay in a downtown area. Also in the late 1960s, The congregation elected its first female deacon, Catherine Nelson Fishburne. In 1971, the church elected its first female elder, Elizabeth Trolin. This may not sound so revolutionary to us now, but Second was among the very first churches in the presbytery to elect women officers in the church. In my interviews with longtime members, the recurring theme I heard from this era of church life was the importance of relationships. Our church's leaders prioritized getting to know and care for one another over debate and dissent. When they thought of the issues of the day, they thought of their neighbors and not some imaginary opponent across the aisle. Given all the turmoil in our country in the late 1960s and 70s, Second remained steadfast in its mission to care for one another and the city where it was planted. Places like Sunday school, youth club, Bible studies, and social gatherings were places where deep relationships were formed. One member shared with me that Second Presbyterian made him feel so special as a boy and as a teenager. It was at Second that he learned people cared about him and where he felt encouraged to be a better person and thus a better member not only of the church, but of his city and his family. Long before we had spaces to gather, like Fellowship Hall and Kirk Hall, members would gather after Sunday school or worship in our church courtyard, the space between our sanctuary and chapel. There they mingled with one another across generations and across political aisles. Thanks to the strong and level-headed leadership of pastors, deacons, and elders, Second continued to be a place where faith was nurtured and Christian character was formed. As you know, the world has not become an easier place to be a Christian. So like our church forebears, we must continually seek to follow God's Spirit, plumb Scripture, and discern together the path of discipleship. These stories tell us where we have been as a community of faith, and it will be up to us as a community of faith to pick up the mantle and continue the work and ministry built on strong foundations so long ago.